Hey there, it's Susie Haley from Functional Synergy, and with this video drop, I want to talk about a common compensation pattern with a common hip release technique called Figure 4, also known as thread the needle. It's interesting with hip mobility exercises because when you watch people do the movement, you'll see that they're actually doing a whole lot more than hip mobility, and in many cases, they're not doing hip mobility at all. And then people begin to wonder why their hips aren't getting any more mobile or any more flexible. And they start to wonder that maybe they're just getting older. And maybe this is what happens at a certain age, that things just don't change. And what I have found is that when people recognize what the compensatory patterns actually are and then learn to move better, not only do they improve their hip mobility, but they feel so much better. They run faster, they move better because now their body parts are doing exactly what they're meant to do. Now, before I get into the hip exercise itself, I just want to talk a bit about compensations because it's really important to understand the compensations, to understand how it's impacting you when doing the exercise. Compensation patterns are essentially any movement pattern that's getting involved in a movement that's not necessary. So it's as if we're borrowing from another area to try and make the first area stronger, but in essence, we're making everything weaker. So in Figure 4, or thread the needle, what often happens is instead of moving the leg bone in the hip socket, as you can see in this video on the corner here, you're seeing the pelvis moving instead. Now you might think, well, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that the leg bone's meant to move in the pelvis, like that's the hip. When you're moving the pelvis, now you're moving the pelvis in relationship to the spine or the rib cage. Now we're starting to get into the QL, into psoas stuff, other back muscles, and that can create more strain and pain and not actually improve the hip at all because that's not the joint we're actually impacting. So then what we can work with is actually improving and recognizing what's going on in that hip joint and then making the changes that we need. So there's a couple of ways that we can do this. The first is we can lie on our backs, bring the leg on up, and start to notice just what's happening in that hip socket. So let's pay attention to that leg bone and to your hip socket and feel yourself moving your leg bone in your hip. It's going to look something like this, moving that leg bone in your hip socket and then rotating that leg bone, right? So that's the movement. So you'll see here that this skeleton's pelvis is not moving. And what we saw before was when this leg bone moved, instead of rotating it, the pelvis moved instead. So where we wanted to have movement happen was here, but instead it was the pelvis that was moving, and that was creating all sorts of stuff up through the back. So the first aim is to, again, notice what it is that you're doing, this leg bone motion in the pelvis, or are you doing pelvis motion in some way, or are you bracing in your rib cage or your jaw or your neck or your fingers or your hands or your feet? Like what's happening there? Become aware of that. Then begin to reduce the compensatory pattern. You don't need to make it zero. Just reduce it. Quiet that movement, which you don't need. So now you're starting to lift the leg. You're starting to rotate the leg in the pelvis. Softening up somewhere else. Thinking about 10% less effort through the other areas and honing in on that leg motion. Now, out of this process, you might realize you need some extra support, that you're recognizing that some of those compensatory patterns were a false sense of stability or support. So you can do one of two things. The first is you can use a strap around your leg, and that provides some external support for your leg so you can practice rotating that leg bone. You can also bring yourself into legs up the wall. And with legs up the wall, you can now lift a leg off, cross the legs, all the while the pelvis is quiet, and slide the leg down toward the knee. Now, I highly recommend that you don't use your hands because now you're getting an external force in, and that takes away from training the tissue around your hip to do the work. So try to keep your hands out of it and keeping your breath easy. Now from here, you might slide the ankle all the way past the knee, but you also might not. That's okay. Just wherever it lands is where we want it to land. Now, whether you're on your back, without the wall or with the wall, what you can do next is bring the hand, same-sided hand as the leg, as the foot that's down. And then move your leg bone away from you. Take your hand around the hip, and as you move your leg, notice if you feel your gluteal muscles, your butt muscles, and gluteal muscles and other external rotators beginning to engage. Now, what you could do is you guys squeeze your butt. We don't want that to happen. What you should feel is those butt muscles, the glutes and the external rotators, starting to engage in response to you moving your leg, right? So you're feeling that engagement, not because you're willfully making it happen, but you're kind of feeling that with your fingers, and as you intend for that leg to move, that butt will then just kind of engage in. Those glute muscles will engage in. Those rotators will engage in. Now, one thing you want to pay attention to is as you're moving that leg away from you, you don't want the front of the hip to engage. So those hip flexors, as the leg's moving away, they are soft. Sometimes people want to push them really hard, but they're actually soft. Now, as you move the leg back towards you, yes, they're engaged, but as it moves away, it's soft. Notice if your pelvis wants to move. Notice if your back wants to get involved. Notice if you want to brace through your ribs or jaw. And again, quiet those compensatory patterns down and just focus in on that leg bone and those gluteal muscles and rotators. Good. And then when you're done, then switch sides and experience it on the other side. What becomes really interesting about this is as you really hone in on the pure movement here and improving your neuromuscular patterns, what begins to happen is that you're training the habitual patterns of this specific joint. You keep reducing the compensations, you keep reducing the inefficiencies, and you actually get your body honing in on better and better and more efficient patterns. And as a result, you just move better, you feel lighter. The parts of you that are meant to be doing the work are actually doing the work. And you'll feel lighter, you'll feel taller, and you'll feel more grounded. Now, if this video has made sense for you, if it resonates with you, or if there's questions, by all means, post them below. Happy to answer them to the best that I can. And if you really like this and you would like to find more videos from me, then please hit the subscribe and that notification button so that you're notified when the next video drops. Happy exploring.